Good morning, it's March 22nd, and this is To My Liberal Friends. Does anyone know what the Biden foreign policy is? Does he have any clear idea of what the United States should be in the world order? These are critical questions that should be considered by every American. Since the end of World War II, the United States has been the leader of the free world. We have been that beacon of light for all other nations to aspire to when it comes to freedom and economic development. It was the United States that helped to rebuild Europe and Japan in the aftermath of the Second World War. It was the United States that confronted the Soviet Union and finally forced them to back down from their goal of world domination. Today, I'm not sure where we would stand when it comes to facing up to our enemies in the world. There's no doubt that Russia and China have become the two nations that would thwart the development of economic freedoms and personal freedoms that have long been cherished by those here in our nation. Both are communist countries and ruled by leaders that have assumed dictatorial powers. Free elections are non-existent in both Russia and China. The first major foreign policy blunder of the Biden administration was the United States withdrawal from Afghanistan. There are many reasons why the United States needed to extricate itself from this 20-year-long war, but how it was done was an utter catastrophe. 13 brave young men and women lost their lives because it was poorly planned and poorly executed. We left behind billions and billions of dollars worth of military equipment, only to have that fall into the hands of the Taliban, who have once again began the process of taking the nation of Afghanistan back towards the Stone Ages. That withdrawal sent a clear signal to our adversaries in the world order that the United States would no longer be a nation to be feared and respected. They've watched the liberals in our country denounce our culture over and over and blame the United States for all the world's ills. They denounce capitalism. They denounce freedom. And nations around the world now realize they can no longer count on the United States to be that champion of freedom and liberty. The war in Ukraine is a classic example of the ineptness of the Biden administration. Over a year ago, Russia invaded Ukraine, and most people, including myself, thought it would be a very short war. What we learned was that we had overestimated the capability of the Russian army, both in training and equipment. We're now entering the second year of that war, and it's only through the bravery and courage of the Ukrainian people that they have kept the Russian bear at bay. Over and over again, President Biden has waffled on his support for the Ukrainian military. He seems to be worried more about what Vladimir Putin would think rather than having Vladimir Putin worry about how Joe Biden would think and react. Biden hesitated on giving the Ukrainians the air defense system they would need. The result has been Ukrainian cities destroyed by Russian missiles. He's waffled on providing military tanks to the Ukrainian military, even going so far as to tell the Germans to provide their Leopard tanks while we withheld our Abrams tanks. The Russians have used their air superiority to pound Ukrainian cities, leaving President Zelensky to beg the United States for aircraft to counter this threat. And still we won't send them the aircraft they need, and we've even blocked some of the NATO nations like Poland from giving them aircraft. The Biden administration just wrings its hands on what action to take. Events in the past 2 weeks have demonstrated just how bold the Russians and Chinese are willing to be in usurping the role of the United States as the leader in the world order. The Chinese brokered a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. This was a role the United States had always played, and now we've abdicated that role to the Chinese. Now we have Chinese President Xi meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin and forming an alliance. And despite what John Kirby says in the White House, this is an alliance, not just a marriage of convenience. This is something that would be unheard of under previous American presidents. But as I've said, they no longer fear the United States and are now acting out boldly to tell the world that the United States will no longer be a major player, and they, Russia and China, will dictate the terms of how the world operates. Make no mistake, the Chinese are watching the Ukrainian war carefully. It is no secret they intend to retake the island of Taiwan at some point in time. President Biden has said we will defend Taiwan, but unfortunately words are not the equal of actions. We see the Chinese exerting influence in Africa and Latin America as well. I'm not sure exactly whatever happened to the Monroe Doctrine. Beijing has set its sights on overtaking the U.S. military economically, culturally, and militarily. Mr. Xi is in Moscow because supporting Mr. Putin advances his vision. He wants Russia to conquer Ukraine so it's easier for China to invade Taiwan. He wants Russia to threaten the rest of Europe because it draws America's attention from Asia. It would force the U.S. to keep a large military presence in Europe, opening the door for China throughout Asia. And we cannot forget the lunatic in North Korea. He may not be the smartest guy in the room, but even he can watch the hemming and hawing by Biden when the U.S. interests are threatened. Now is the time for the United States and President Biden to send a strong signal to the world that the U.S. will remain the leader of the free world. Biden can do that by immediately sending the Abrams tanks, by sending military aircraft needed by the Ukrainians, and telling the Russians that more is on the way unless they withdraw. Biden does not seem to realize that the Ukrainian victory would send a chilling message to China that any further aggression won't be tolerated. A generation ago, Chairman Mao visited Russia and said, and I quote him, "The international situation has now reached a new turning point. There are two winds in the world today, the east wind and the west wind. I believe that the east wind is prevailing over the west wind," end quote. President Xi is repeating that claim, and Biden's inaction give him more and more credence when he makes this claim. It's been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy the podcast, hit the subscribe button and recommend it to your friends.